Dear listeners, a new day and a new story to discuss. Today I'm going to tell you a story that interests me. Listen and write down what you think about this situation. I'm interested in your opinions. You know, they say home is where the heart is. But what if your heart is shattered, scattered along the highway back from New York to a house that no longer feels like yours? It's funny how silence in a car can scream betrayal. We were just an hour away from what used to be our sanctuary, but today, it felt more like a battleground. I can't believe Emily's already in college, I said, trying to pierce that silence. She was the glue that held us together, I guess. My wife, Sarah, didn't even look up from her phone. Yeah, she muttered, her disinterest palpable. That's all she offered. No smile, no tear, nothing. Just a void where warmth used to live. As I navigated the Ford Transit, heavy with Emily's belongings, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was also transporting the remnants of my failing marriage. Each mile closer to home, the weight of realization grew heavier. The woman next to me was a stranger. She was lost in her messages, chuckling to herself. "Who's making you laugh?" I asked, a sting in my tone I didn't intend to mask. "It's just Betty," she replied, a little too quickly. Was it her tone, or the slight flush of her cheek that gave her away? I knew about Betty's ongoing drama with her husband. It was the kind of gossip Sarah fed on. But something didn't sit right. The secrecy, the sudden trips out of town to help Betty cope. It was all adding up to a picture I didn't want to see. "We should talk, Sarah," I ventured, as I took the exit towards our neighborhood. The muscles in her jaw tightened. "About what, James? About how you think I'm not a good wife? Or is it again about how I'm a bad mother because I'm not crying over Emily leaving for college?" Her words stung. They always do. But today, they reeked of guilt. Not the kind that begs for forgiveness, but the kind that's defensive, ready to strike before being struck. "No, about us. About what we've become," I said, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. Sarah scoffed, turning to look out the window. "What we've become? You mean what you turned us into?" I wanted to yell, to demand the truth I already knew deep down. But what good would it do? Instead, I focused on the road, on the home that was looming closer, feeling more like a trap than a haven. "You know, sometimes I wonder if you regret it. All of it," I finally said, the words cold but necessary. She turned sharply towards me, her eyes narrowing. "Maybe I do," she hissed. "Maybe I regret marrying someone who can't see past his own insecurities." And there it was. The knife twisted, not in my back, but right through the heart. The rest of the drive passed in a hostile silence that was louder than any argument we ever had. As we pulled into the driveway, I caught sight of a sheriff's car. My heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, but almost out of relief. Here it was, my exit, maybe. But as I parked behind it, and Paul stepped out, that relief twisted into something else. Betrayal. Deep, raw, undeniable betrayal. "What's going on, Bill?" Paul asked, looking as uncomfortable as a man about to shatter another man's world. I looked at Sarah, seeking an ally in her before facing whatever was coming. But she wouldn't meet my eyes. She knew. She had known all along. "This is the part of my job I hate the most," Paul said, handing me a manila envelope. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, heavy like the last piece of a puzzle I didn't want to complete. As I pulled out the divorce papers, my world didn't crumble. It crystallized into sharp, jagged pieces of reality. "You've been served," Paul added, his voice a blend of sympathy and professionalism. Sarah stood behind Paul's assistant, a strategic move to avoid my gaze. Betrayal wasn't just a word anymore. It was her. It was this moment. It was the realization that the person I built my life around had already demolished it, brick by brick, lie by lie. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked, my voice trembling not just with anger, but with an unspoken plea for it all to be a terrible mistake.
No joke, James.
I suggest you get a lawyer, Paul said, turning to leave. As they walked away, the finality of it all hit me. The divorce papers in my hand were not just the end of a marriage, they were a declaration of war. A war I was thrown into without armor, without consent. So, you see, that journey home wasn't just a drive. It was a descent into a battle I never signed up for, armed with nothing but the shattered pieces of trust and a heart too broken to even seek revenge. Imagine standing in the ruins of what you once called a life, every breath tasting of betrayal. That was me, in the aftermath, clutching those divorce papers like a lifeline, yet feeling like I was drowning. It's a peculiar kind of pain, realizing that the person you loved could dismantle you so completely. It was late, maybe around midnight, when I couldn't stand the silence of our house anymore. Her house, now. I needed answers, and I needed them like I needed air to breathe. So, I picked up my phone and called her. It rang, and for a few heartbeats, I hoped she wouldn't answer. But she did. "James, it's late," was her cold greeting. "Why, Sarah? Why are you doing this?" The question had been burning through my thoughts, scorching everything else away. There was a pause, a small, telling silence before she replied, "You know why. Don't pretend to be the victim here." Her words were like venom, and I felt them course through my veins, fueling my anger. Victim? Is that what you think I am? Or is it easier for you if I am? Stop it, James. You're not making this any easier, she snapped, her voice like ice. It was always about making things easier for her. Easier? You're tearing our life apart, and you want easier? My voice cracked, the facade of calm I had been clinging to shattered completely. There was a shuffling sound on the other end. I'm doing what I need to do for myself. I can't keep living a lie. A lie. I laughed, but it was hollow. And here I was, thinking our marriage was real. It was real, James. But we changed. I changed. I can't be who you want me to be. Her confession struck a chord, a painful dissonance that echoed loudly in the hollow space between us. What about Emily? Did you think about her in all this? How this would affect her? I demanded. It was a low blow, invoking our daughter, but the stakes were too high, and I was too far gone to play fair. She'll understand one day. She's not a child anymore, Sarah replied, her tone dismissive, as if our daughter's pain was just another casualty in her quest for whatever freedom she was seeking. And what about me? Was I ever truly anything to you? I asked, desperation bleeding into my words. You were everything. Until you weren't. Her reply cut deep, leaving me reeling. Is there someone else? The question hung in the air, heavy and ominous. There was a long pause. I think you should talk to your lawyer, James. It's better if we communicate through them from now on. Is there someone else, Sarah? I pressed, needing to hear her say it. It doesn't matter. With those 3 words, she hung up. It does matter. It mattered to me. The shadows of doubt and the whispers of her late returns began to weave together into a narrative I couldn't ignore. Betrayal wasn't just about the divorce. It was about the secrets, the lies, the quiet stepping out of rooms when phone calls came in. The next morning, with a mind clouded by unrest and a heart poisoned by betrayal, I made a decision. If she wanted war, I would give it to her, but not the kind she was expecting. I'd dig into her secrets, uncover her lies, and expose the reality she was so desperate to hide. Revenge wasn't just a thought anymore. It was a plan in motion. And as the sun rose, casting light on the deception that had darkened my door, I felt a vindictive clarity. She wouldn't see me coming, and by the time she realized what was happening, it would be too late. For both of us. You know, when you've been kicked in the gut, the world kind of slows down, sharpens. I started to see everything, every whisper, every late night, every unread notification on her phone, as evidence. Maybe I was grasping at straws, but hell, I needed to grasp at something. It was a Tuesday when it all flipped again. I was sitting in my usual spot at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in front of me, trying to sort out the mess of papers my lawyer had dumped on me. Divorce papers, financial statements, a list of assets. It was all just numbers and words, meaningless in the grand scheme of things. Then my phone rang. It was Paul, the sheriff, someone I thought was a friend, but now, who knew anymore? "James, we need to talk," he said, his voice tense, which was odd for him. Paul was usually as steady as they come. "About what?" I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "It's about Sarah. Can you meet me?" Something in his tone set off alarms in my head. "Sure, Paul. When and where?" "The park, by the old fountain. 15 minutes." I agreed and hung up, a knot forming in my stomach. The drive over was a blur. My mind raced, scenarios building and collapsing. Was she hurt? Was it something worse? Or maybe, just maybe, was this about her secrets finally coming out? I saw Paul waiting, pacing back and forth by the fountain, his usual calm demeanor gone. That alone was enough to heighten my anxiety. "James, thanks for coming so quickly," he said, barely acknowledging my greeting. "What's going on, Paul? Is Sarah okay?" The words tasted bitter, concern laced with venom. "It's not about her well-being, not in the way you think." He paused, looking around as if the trees might be listening. "It's about the divorce. And about something else." My heart raced. "What about the divorce?" Paul looked me straight in the eyes. "She's pushing it through quickly, using some leverage I think you need to know about." "Leverage?" My mind raced through our shared assets, our life. "What leverage?" He hesitated, took a deep breath. "She has evidence, James. Evidence that could hurt you, hurt your case. Photos, messages. It seems she's been preparing for this for a while. The ground beneath me might as well have opened up." "Preparing? What are you saying, Paul?" "She's been gathering information, documenting things. I don't know everything, but it looks like she's been 2 steps ahead of you this whole time." I felt the sting of betrayal all over again, deeper this time because it wasn't just her betrayal now. "And you? Where do you stand in all this?" Paul shifted, uncomfortable. "I'm your friend, James. I didn't know until recently. I thought you should hear it from someone who cares." "Someone who cares." The irony wasn't lost on me. "So, what now?" My voice was flat, resigned yet simmering with anger. "Now? You fight back. You get your own evidence, or you find a way to discredit hers. You don't let her walk away with everything. Fight back." As if it were that simple. But as I looked at Paul, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, but a cold resolve was setting in. If she wanted a war, she'd get one. But not the straightforward battle she was expecting. No, this would be a war fought in the shadows, with every dirty trick I could muster. "Thanks, Paul," I said, my voice cold, my mind already turning over possibilities. "I'll handle it from here." As I walked away, the pieces began to fall into place. Sarah had been playing me for a fool, but now it was my turn. She thought she had the upper hand, but she didn't know me. Not really. She didn't know what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. And as I drove back home, a plan began to form, each detail a stitch in the tapestry of my revenge. This wasn't just about salvaging what was left of my dignity or securing my financial future anymore. This was personal, and I was going to make sure she never saw me coming. So here we are, you and I, in the thick of the fallout. It's funny how the quiet after a storm isn't really quiet at all. It's loud, it's deafening. It's the sound of your life unraveling, thread by bloody thread. After Paul's bombshell, my world didn't just shift, it capsized. And there I was, plotting in the wreckage, fixated on one thing: unmasking Sarah's deceit. That morning, as the first light crept through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor where we once laughed and loved, I was already awake. Sleep had become a stranger to me, replaced by a relentless drive to act. I had my phone in hand, scrolling through contacts, deciding who could be an ally and who was another hidden enemy. Trust had become a luxury I could no longer afford. My first call was to a guy I knew from the darker corners of my past life, before marriage sanitized my existence. "Mark, I need a favor," I began, my voice rough with unshed anger and sleepless nights. "What kind of favor?" Mark's voice was wary, cautious. After all, I hadn't reached out in years. "The kind that digs up dirt," I replied, skipping the niceties. "I need everything you can find on someone."
Photo, message, transaction.
Everything. There was a pause, the kind that told me he was weighing his options. "That's a heavy ask, James. Who are we talking about?" "My wife," I said flatly. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "Damn, James. All right, I'm in. But you owe me." "Understood." And just like that, I was in debt again, the kind I'd sworn off when I slipped that ring onto Sarah's finger, a ring now discarded, lying somewhere cold and forgotten. As the day bled into evening, the house felt more like a fortress, my fortress, holding back the siege of memories threatening to breach its walls. Then came the moment I'd been bracing for, the confrontation. Sarah walked in, her key turning in the lock like a knife, twisting in my gut. "James, we need to talk." Her voice was steady, too steady. She was armored up, ready for battle. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, blocking her path like a guard dog. "We've got nothing to talk about." She paused, assessing me with those sharp, calculating eyes. "I think we do. About the divorce. About the settlement." I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter, jagged sound. "The settlement? You mean the shakedown? It doesn't have to be ugly, James." Her words were coated in that sweet, venomous honey she knew how to produce at will. "It's too late for pretty, Sarah. You made sure of that." There was a flicker of something across her face. Irritation? Fear? It was gone before I could really catch it. "What do you want, James?" "I want what's mine. And I want the truth." "The truth?" She laughed now, a cold mirror of my own earlier response. "You can't handle the truth, James. You never could." "That's where you're wrong." Stepping closer, I dropped my bombshell, the product of a day's frantic calls and digging. "I know about the bank account in Switzerland." For the first time, I saw her falter, her facade cracking. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Sarah. It's over. I've got the statements. I've got proof." Her eyes narrowed, a calculating gleam taking over. "You're bluffing. Try me." My voice was steel, my stance unyielding. We stood there, in the dying light, the space between us charged with the electricity of war declared but not yet waged. Finally, she stepped back, her expression hardening. "You'll get what's coming to you, James." "Likewise, Sarah." As she retreated to the sanctuary of her bedroom, I turned back to the darkened window, my reflection a ghostly specter superimposed on the night. This was no longer a marriage dissolving. This was total annihilation. And I had just lit the fuse. Here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. It's not a soft landing. It's a crash. It's chaos. It's the kind of pain that scrapes at your insides until you're hollow. That's where I found myself after I threw down the gauntlet with Sarah. Each day that followed felt like wading through a nightmare, thick with the fog of war. I'd sit in the same chair for hours after midnight, the darkness outside matching the murk swirling inside my head. Vengeance, once a fiery companion, now flickered like a candle in the wind, uncertain, unstable. It's in these quiet hours that you really meet yourself, isn't it? The raw, unvarnished truth of who you are, what you've become. The next morning, the phone rang. It was Mark, his voice urgent. "James, we need to meet. Now." We decided on a public park, the open space a stark contrast to the secrets we were trading. Mark was there, looking every bit the part of a man who knew too much. "I got the dirt you wanted," he said without preamble, handing me a thick envelope. His hands were steady, but his eyes, they weren't. They were wary, darting around like those of a hunted animal. I opened the envelope right there, the documents inside a litany of betrayal, bank statements, photographs, emails. Everything. It was worse than I'd imagined. Not just an affair. No, Sarah was a collector of secrets, hoarding them like a dragon with gold. "This is it, then," I muttered, the papers trembling slightly in my grasp. "There's more," Mark added, his voice dropping. "She's been funneling money out of the country. Big sums. And not just to any account. These are payoffs, James." My heart pounded a brutal rhythm against my ribs. Payoffs? For what? Silence. Compliance. She's not just cheating, James. She's involved in something bigger. Something darker. The revelation struck like a physical blow. I felt it in my gut, the twist of betrayal knotting tighter. Sarah, the woman I shared a bed with, the mother of my daughter, was not just unfaithful. She was criminal. "What do we do with this?" I asked, my voice hollow. Mark shook his head, a grim line to his mouth. "That's on you, James. But be careful. This isn't amateur hour. You're playing with fire." As I drove home, the weight of the envelope in the passenger seat felt like a bomb ready to detonate. With every red light, every stop sign, the gravity of my next steps weighed heavier. Could I expose her? Should I? When I got home, the house was silent. Too silent. Sarah was out, probably weaving more webs, plotting further deceits. I went to the study, the papers spread out before me like a map to a hidden minefield. As I sat there, contemplating the abyss before me, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. "We need to talk. Tonight. There's something you need to know." Tonight, then, would be the reckoning. My mind raced with possibilities, scenarios spinning out like the threads of a spider's web. What did she know? What card was she planning to play? The hours until our meeting dragged like years. When she finally walked through the door, there was a resolve in her stride that I hadn't seen before. She wasn't just ready to fight. She was ready to end it. "James," she began, her voice eerily calm, "I know you've been digging. And I know what you've found." I stood up, the papers in my hand a shield against her words. "And I know about the money, Sarah. The payoffs. What the hell are you involved in?" Her laugh was cold, devoid of humor. "Oh, James, it's not what I'm involved in. It's what we're involved in. You see, your name is on those accounts too." The room spun. This wasn't just a spiral. This was a plunge into darkness. "How?" My voice was barely a whisper. Sarah's smile was thin, sharp as a blade. "You signed the papers. Remember? For tax purposes?" The trap snapped shut, the click echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Betrayal, deceit, crime. They weren't just her sins. They were mine now, too. "So what now?" I asked, my voice dead in the air. "Now," Sarah replied, stepping closer, "we decide how deep we're both willing to bury this." The game had changed. The player had evolved. And as we stood there, measuring each other's resolve, I realized this wasn't just a battle. It was a war. And it was far from over. I'm sitting here, in the same chair where I've plotted and planned for months, but tonight it's different. Tonight, the room feels colder, emptier, as if the very walls are backing away from me, ashamed of what I've become. It's just you and me now, and I'm not sure if you're a confidant or a judge. Either way, I've got things to confess. When Sarah told me my name was on those accounts, it was like being punched in the gut. Not just because I didn't remember signing anything. That could have been a lie, a manipulation. No, it was the realization that I might have unknowingly facilitated her schemes, or worse, willingly blinded myself to the signs because I didn't want to see them. Either way, I was complicit. James, you need to understand, Sarah had said earlier tonight, her voice steady, her eyes not flinching from mine. This isn't just about us anymore. There are others involved, powerful people who won't take kindly to their secrets getting out. I stared at her, the gravity of her words sinking in. Who are we talking about, Sarah? She walked to the window, looking out into the darkness. If I tell you, there's no going back. You have to be sure you're ready for the consequences. Was I ready? The truth is, I don't know if anyone can ever be ready for a life falling apart. Tell me, I said finally, the words like lead on my tongue. She turned back to me, her face pale in the moonlight. Politicians, businessmen, people in power. My activities were funded by their desires and secrets. The money was just a part of it. I sat back, the weight of her revelations pinning me to the chair. And you dragged me into this? I protected you as long as I could, she said softly. I thought I could handle it on my own. Protected me? Or used me? I wanted to yell, to rage at her for what she had done, not just to our marriage but to our very lives. But what would that change? Nothing. Instead, I felt a weariness seep into my bones, a tiredness so deep it was almost calming. We need to fix this, I said quietly. Not just for our sake, but for Emily's. She can't be caught up in this. Sarah nodded, her shoulders sagging as if a weight had been lifted, just slightly. I have a plan, she began, but it's risky, and I need you with me, truly with me, this time. Listening to her outline her plan, I realized this was our only way out, not just from the legal mess, but from the web of lies and betrayal we had woven around ourselves. It would mean coming clean, facing the consequences, and hoping for a shot at redemption. Not just in the eyes of the law, but in Emily's eyes and maybe, just maybe, in each other's. As Sarah talked, the pieces of her plan slotting into place with the precision of a chess game, I saw her not just as the woman who betrayed me, but as the woman I had married. Brave, intelligent, fatally flawed. Do you think we can do this? She asked, her voice uncertain for the first time that night. I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing all the mistakes, all the wrong turns, but also the love that had once bound us together. We have to, I said. It's our only chance. Now, as I sit alone, reflecting on all that's been said and done, I wonder if this plan of ours is just another layer of self-deception, a way to salvage our conscience. Maybe it is. But as I turn over the first page of the rest of our lives, I realize that sometimes the only way out is through. And maybe, just maybe, on the other side, there's a chance not just for justice, but for forgiveness too. So tomorrow, we begin. Together. And tonight, I'll sit here a little longer, reflecting on the man I was, the man I've become, and the man I hope to be. If there's a road to redemption, it's paved with more than just good intentions. It's paved with the hard, painful truths we tell ourselves when no one else is listening.